The Zephyrian Empire had spent the better part of 3 millennia perfecting the art of not dying from preventable accidents. Their civilization had progressed beyond the primitive notion that danger was something to be confronted rather than methodically eliminated through extensive risk assessment protocols, 17 layers of safety redundancy, and a bureaucratic process so thorough that even thinking about potentially hazardous activities required filing Form ZE 4471B in triplicate. Captain Vexthara of a research vessel Infinite Caution took considerable pride in her ship's spotless safety record. Not a single crew member had suffered so much as a minor abrasion in the past 4 standard cycles, a feat that earned her commendations from the Imperial Safety Commission and the admiration of risk management specialists across 12 star systems. The Infinite Caution lived up to its name with such dedication that the ship's corridors featured padded corners, non-slip surfaces with molecular-level grip enhancement, and warning lights that activated whenever someone walked faster than what the onboard AI calculated as optimally cautious pace. Which made their current assignment particularly ironic. The Galactic Survey Division, in what could only be described as a moment of cosmic humor, had tasked the Infinite Caution with establishing first contact protocols with a newly discovered species that had somehow managed to achieve interstellar communication despite living on what the initial planetary assessment classified as a Class 7 death world. The species called themselves humans, and they hailed from a planet with such delightfully terrifying characteristics as active tectonic plates, weather systems capable of generating winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, and an atmospheric composition that would be considered industrial solvent on most civilized worlds. The preliminary reports are fascinating, Captain, announced Science Officer Quindal, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he reviewed the data streaming across his workstation. These humans appear to have evolved in an environment where survival required constant adaptation to imminent mortal peril. Vexthara's translator implant struggled with the concept. Her species had eliminated natural selection approximately 2,000 years ago through comprehensive genetic optimization and environmental control systems. The idea that evolution might continue through exposure to actual danger struck her as both primitive and oddly inefficient. Surely the reports are exaggerated, she replied, adjusting her comfort-regulated atmospheric suit. No intelligent species could develop advanced technology while simultaneously engaging in behavior that actively threatens their continued existence. Security Chief Trenvex, whose primary qualification was an advanced degree in theoretical threat assessment rather than any practical experience with actual threats, consulted his safety databases with obverse concern. The humans have requested what they term a cultural exchange dinner aboard our vessel. However, their definition of food preparation appears to involve the deliberate application of extreme heat to organic matter, a process they refer to as cooking. Controlled thermal manipulation of consumables, Vexthara mused, finding the concept both alien and mildly disturbing. Zephyrian nutrition came in pre-processed, safe-to-certified blocks that eliminated any possibility of contamination, spoilage, or the need for potentially dangerous preparation procedures. I suppose we should accommodate their customs, provided we implement appropriate containment protocols. The human delegation arrived precisely on schedule, which surprised the Zephyrians almost as much as the humans' casual attitude toward what any reasonable being would consider basic survival instincts. Commander Elena Reeves, the expedition leader, greeted the Zephyrian crew with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm despite being surrounded by enough safety equipment to stock a small emergency response center. "Thank you for hosting us," Commander Reeves said, her words translated through the universal communication interface with remarkable clarity. "We brought our chef, Dmitri, to prepare a traditional Earth meal. We thought it might help bridge our cultural differences." Vexthara felt her primary heart skip a beat, while her secondary heart maintained steady circulation according to standard physiological safety protocols. The humans had brought someone whose primary function involved deliberately exposing food to conditions that could potentially cause harm. This was either an elaborate suicide ritual or evidence that human risk assessment capabilities were even more primitive than the initial reports suggested. Chef Dmitri appeared to be a typical human specimen, which is to say that he looked like he had been designed by someone who considered mortal vulnerability a desirable feature rather than a significant design flaw. He moved with the sort of casual confidence that suggested either supreme ignorance of potential hazards or concerning familiarity with dangerous situations. His skin bore several small scars that made Trenvex immediately reach for his emergency medical scanner. These markings indicate previous trauma exposure, the security chief whispered to Vexthara through their private communication channel. This individual has survived multiple tissue damage events. Perhaps they are decorative, Vexthara suggested hopefully, though our anthropological database contained no references to intentional scarification among technologically advanced species. The tour of the Infinite Caution proceeded with typical Zephyrian thoroughness, each safety feature explained in detail, while the humans nodded politely and occasionally exchanged glances that the ship's behavioral analysis systems interpreted as either amusement or barely contained terror. Commander Reeves asked thoughtful questions about their environmental controls and emergency procedures, while Chef Kozlov seemed particularly interested in their food preparation facilities. "Your galley is remarkably sterile," Kozlov observed as they entered the ship's pristine food processing center. The space gleamed with surfaces so thoroughly decontaminated that they practically radiated cleanliness. "Where do you keep your knives?" The question produced a moment of silence so profound that the ship's ambient noise dampening systems automatically increased their output to compensate for what the AI interpreted as a potential system malfunction. "Knives," Quindao repeated, his translator struggling with the concept. "Sharp metal implements for food preparation," Kozlov clarified, apparently unaware that he had just described what every Zephyrian safety protocol classified as Category 1 hazardous tools, unauthorized personnel access strictly prohibited. Vexthara felt her understanding of interspecies relations undergo rapid recalibration. "You deliberately utilize sharp metal objects in proximity to consumable materials." "Well, yes," Kozlov replied with the sort of casual tone typically reserved for discussing weather patterns or other completely non-threatening topics. "How else would you prepare fresh ingredients?" The Zephyrians exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of information through their sophisticated nonverbal communication protocols. Fresh ingredients implied food that had not been subjected to comprehensive safety processing, while the casual mention of sharp metal objects suggested a species-wide disregard for basic injury prevention that bordered on the incomprehensible. "Perhaps," Vexthara suggested carefully, "we could observe your food preparation techniques in our secondary processing facility, which features enhanced safety containment." The secondary facility had been designed for handling potentially hazardous research materials and featured emergency isolation capabilities, automated medical response systems, and enough protective equipment to outfit a small military unit. If the humans were going to demonstrate their apparently suicidal food preparation customs, at least the damage could be contained. Dmitri Kozlov surveyed the space with obvious appreciation for its functionality, completely missing the massive danger. Authorized personnel only warnings displayed in 17 different galactic languages. "This will work perfectly. Do you mind if I use my own knives? I brought a few favorites." The human reached into what appeared to be a standard equipment case and withdrew an object that made every Zephyrian in the room instinctively step backward. The knife was approximately 20 centimeters of gleaming metal sharpened to an edge so fine that it seemed to cut through the ambient light. Trenvex's hand moved automatically toward his emergency communication device, while Quindao began calculating the statistical probability of survival in proximity to such an obviously lethal implement. "That appears to be a weaponized cutting device," Vexthara observed, proud that her voice remained steady despite her cardiovascular systems shifting into emergency readiness mode. "It's a chef's knife," Kozlov replied, holding the object with the sort of casual familiarity that suggested either complete insanity or extensive experience with mortal danger. "Perfect for chopping vegetables, slicing meat, that sort of thing. Would you like to see?" What followed could only be described as a masterclass in controlled violence masquerading as food preparation. Kozlov moved with fluid precision, his hands manipulating the knife in patterns that seemed to defy basic physics, while somehow avoiding the sort of catastrophic injury that Zephyrian safety protocols suggested should occur within the first 30 seconds of exposure to such hazardous conditions. The vegetables, sourced from Earth's apparently hostile biosphere, were transformed from recognizable organic matter into perfectly uniform pieces through a process that involved moving the knife at speeds that made Quindao's motion tracking equipment struggle to maintain accurate measurements. Each cut produced a sound that registered on the ship's acoustic monitoring systems as potentially dangerous. Yet Kozlov continued his work with a sort of relaxed concentration that suggested this was not only normal but routine. The key, Kozlov explained while reducing a collection of vegetables to precisely sized components, is maintaining proper knife control and letting the blade do the work. You never want to fight with your tools. Vexthara found herself mesmerized by the demonstration, despite every survival instinct screaming that she should retreat to a safe distance and initiate emergency containment procedures. The human's movements were hypnotic in their controlled precision, each motion flowing naturally into the next as if the knife were an extension of his own anatomy rather than a separate tool capable of causing immediate and severe injury. How do you calculate the optimal trajectory for each cutting motion? Quindal asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his safety training. The mathematical complexity of avoiding self-inflicted trauma while maintaining consistent results must require significant computational assistance. Kozlov paused in his work, considering the question with obvious confusion. I don't calculate anything. It's just muscle memory and experience. You develop a feel for it after a while. The concept of muscle memory performing complex safety calculations without conscious oversight struck the Zephyrians as either miraculous or evidence that human neural architecture functioned according to principles that their xenobiology databases had failed to anticipate. The idea that someone could perform potentially lethal actions through unconscious reflex challenged their understanding of intelligent behavior so fundamentally that Trenvex began updating his threat assessment protocols in real time. Perhaps, Vexthara suggested with admirable diplomatic restraint, you could demonstrate your technique more slowly so that we might better understand the safety procedures involved. Kozlov obliged by reducing his cutting speed to what he probably considered a more observable pace, though his movements still registered as dangerously fast by Zephyrian standards. The knife moved through the vegetables with mechanical precision, each cut identical to the last in a display of consistency that their manufacturing systems would have been proud to achieve, which made what happened next all the more catastrophic to Zephyrian peace of mind. The knife slipped. Not dramatically, not with any obvious cause that their safety analysis systems could identify, but simply shifted trajectory by a few degrees as Kozlov adjusted his grip on what appeared to be a particularly recalcitrant piece of vegetation. The blade, suddenly freed from its intended path, began falling toward the human's hand with the sort of inexorable certainty that made physics-based injury prediction a depressingly exact science. Every Zephyrian in the room experienced the same moment of horrified anticipation as their threat assessment protocols calculated impact time, probable injury severity, and optimal emergency response procedures. Trenvex reached for his medical kit, while Quindal prepared to document what would undoubtedly become a cautionary tale about the dangers of interspecies cultural exchange. Dmitri Kozlov caught the knife. Not fumbled for it. Not made a desperate grab that might have resulted in additional injury, but simply adjusted his hand position and caught the falling blade by its handle with a sort of casual precision that suggested catching potentially lethal falling objects was such a routine occurrence that it barely merited conscious attention. The action took perhaps half a second from beginning to end. To the humans present, it was apparently so unremarkable that Commander Reeves continued her conversation with Vexthara without pause. To the Zephyrians, it was a demonstration of reflexes so impossibly fast and accurate that their understanding of human capabilities underwent immediate and dramatic revision. Did you document that? Vexthara whispered to Quindal through their private communication channel. The human intercepted a falling sharp object traveling at approximately 4.7 meters per second and achieved successful grip acquisition without apparent injury, Quindal replied, his voice tight with what might have been scientific excitement or barely controlled panic. The reaction time was 0.127 seconds, which exceeds our fastest recorded reflexes by a factor of 12. Trenvex, meanwhile, was experiencing what could only be described as a professional crisis. His entire understanding of threat assessment was based on the assumption that intelligent beings possess survival instincts sophisticated enough to avoid unnecessary exposure to danger. The idea that someone might not only accept such exposure, but develop reflexes capable of mitigating it in real time suggested that humans operated according to threat management principles that made Zephyrian safety protocols look positively reckless by comparison. The blade trajectory would have resulted in significant tissue damage, he muttered, reviewing his sensor data with obvious disbelief. The probability of successful interception without injury was approximately 0.003%, yet the human achieved optimal grip positioning on the first attempt. Dmitri Kozlov, blissfully unaware that he had just shattered the worldview of 3 highly trained xenobiologists, continued his food preparation with the same casual competence that had characterized his work before the incident. To him, catching a falling knife was apparently such a routine aspect of food preparation that it required no comment, no pause for appreciation of his remarkable reflexes, and certainly no consideration of the alternative outcomes that would have sent any reasonable Zephyrian into medical shock. "These root vegetables have excellent texture," he commented while resuming his cutting technique, his movements now watched with the sort of horrified fascination typically reserved for natural disasters or particularly compelling traffic accidents. Vex Thara found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew about human capabilities. The initial planetary assessment had classified Earth as a death world, but she was beginning to suspect that designation was less about the planet's hostile conditions and more about the sort of species capable of not only surviving, but thriving in such an environment. The implications were staggering. If humans possessed reflexes capable of catching falling blades, what other survival capabilities might they have developed during their evolution in what now seemed less like a hostile environment and more like an extended training program for producing the most dangerous species in the galaxy? "Commander Reeves," Vex Thara said carefully, "might I inquire about the typical training required to develop such reflexes?" The human commander looked puzzled by the question. "Training? Oh, you mean catching things. Most people can do that. It's just a natural reaction when something falls." Natural reaction. The words echoed through the ship's communication systems like a declaration of war against everything the Zephyrians understood about intelligent behavior. If catching potentially lethal falling objects was a natural reaction, what did that suggest about the sort of environment that would produce such reactions as standard equipment? Quindal was already accessing the planetary databases, his 4 eyes scanning through atmospheric composition data, geological surveys, and biological diversity reports with the frantic energy of someone who had just realized they might have seriously underestimated the subject of their research. "Captain," he announced in a voice that managed to sound both scientifically excited and genuinely terrified, "I believe we may need to revise our threat assessment classifications." The data was illuminating in the sort of way that made comfortable assumptions crumble into powder. Earth was not merely a hostile environment. It was a planetary-scale training facility for producing organisms capable of surviving conditions that would challenge the emergency response capabilities of most civilized worlds. The gravity was approximately 40% higher than Zephyrian standard, the atmospheric pressure sufficient to cause discomfort without proper environmental suits, and the weather patterns included phenomena with names like tornado, hurricane, and blizzard that sounded like weapon systems rather than natural atmospheric conditions. But the real revelation came when Quindal accessed the biological diversity reports. Earth was home to an estimated 8 million species, many of which appeared to have evolved specifically to kill and consume other species, including humans. The planet featured predators capable of running at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, others equipped with venom potent enough to cause system failure within minutes, and still others with jaw strength sufficient to crush materials that required industrial processing equipment on most civilized worlds. They evolved alongside organisms specifically designed to hunt and kill them, Quindal announced, his voice filled with the sort of awe typically reserved for contemplating cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension. "And they survived," Trenvex added, his security training suddenly seeming woefully inadequate for assessing threats posed by species that had spent millions of years in armed conflict with their own ecosystem. Vex Thara felt the comfortable certainties of first contact protocol, dissolving around her like safety barriers made of paper. The humans had not merely survived the hostile environment, they had thrived in it, developed technology despite it, and reached the stars while carrying with them reflexes honed by eons of exposure to immediate mortal danger. Dmitri Kozlov finished his food preparation demonstration and began the next phase of his cultural exchange program, applying controlled heat to the prepared ingredients using equipment that generated temperatures capable of causing third-degree burns within seconds of contact. He managed this process with the same casual competence that had characterized his knife work, manipulating heating elements and hot surfaces with a sort of relaxed confidence that suggested thermal injury was simply another manageable risk rather than a catastrophic failure of safety protocols. The key to good cooking, he explained while adjusting flame intensity on equipment that made Trenvex reach instinctively for his fire suppression controls, is understanding heat management and timing. You want to develop the flavors without burning the ingredients. Understanding heat management. The phrase struck the Zephyrians as roughly equivalent to developing a casual familiarity with controlled fusion reactions or achieving comfortable proficiency in gravitational manipulation. Yet Kozlov discussed it as if thermal management were a basic life skill rather than an advanced technical discipline requiring years of specialized training and extensive safety certification. The aroma that began emanating from the cooking food was unlike anything in the Zephyrian olfactory experience. Their nutrition came in standardized, scent-neutral forms designed to provide optimal nutritional value, without triggering any sensory responses that might interfere with cognitive function. The smell of cooking human food was complex, lead, and apparently capable of causing involuntary salivation responses even in species that had never encountered oath-based organic chemistry. "This smells remarkable," Vexthara admitted, surprised by her body's positive response to what should have been alien chemical signatures. "Wait until you taste it," Commander Reeves replied with obvious pride. "Dmitri is one of our best chefs. He trained at several of Earth's finest culinary institutions." Culinary institutions. Places where humans apparently gathered to learn increasingly sophisticated methods of applying controlled danger to food preparation. The concept suggested a level of cultural sophistication built around risk management that made Zephyrian safety protocols look like primitive superstitions. The meal that emerged from Kozlov's demonstration was a masterpiece of controlled complexity. Multiple ingredients had been transformed through precise application of heat, sharp metal implements, and chemical processes that produced results far exceeding the sum of their component parts. The presentation was visually appealing, the aromas were complex and inviting, and the whole production had been accomplished through casual mastery of techniques that would have required emergency response teams to supervise on any sensible world. "Please, try some," Kozlov offered, serving portions with the same confident handling of potentially dangerous utensils that had characterized his entire performance. The Zephyrians approached the meal with the sort of caution typically reserved for handling unstable radioactive materials. Their initial tastings were tentative, carefully monitored by medical sensors, and accompanied by detailed chemical analysis to ensure that they were not inadvertently consuming anything that might cause biological system failures. The food was extraordinary. Not merely nutritionally adequate or even pleasant, but complex and satisfying in ways that challenged their understanding of consumable matter. The flavors had depth and complexity that their standardized nutrition blocks could never achieve, combinations of sweet, savory, and subtle chemical interactions that produced sensory experiences that food scientists would need decades to replicate. "This is exceptional," Quindal admitted after several careful bites. The flavor complexity suggests extensive knowledge of chemical interactions and thermal dynamics. "Just good ingredients and proper technique," Kozlov replied with characteristic human understatement. "Cooking is one of humanity's oldest arts. We've been refining it for thousands of years. Thousands of years of developing increasingly sophisticated methods of controlled risk management disguised as food preparation." The implications were staggering. While the Zephyrians had spent their technological development eliminating danger through avoidance and safety protocols, humans had apparently spent the same period learning to dance with danger so skillfully that they could transform it into art. As the evening progressed and the cultural exchange continued, Vexthara found herself reassessing not only humanity's capabilities but the fundamental assumptions underlying Zephyrian civilization. Their approach to safety and risk management, which had seemed so obviously superior to the primitive dangers of less advanced worlds, now appeared almost naive compared to the elegant complexity of human risk integration. The humans did not avoid danger, they mastered it. They did not eliminate risk, they developed capabilities that allowed them to engage with risk so skillfully that they could transform it into beneficial outcomes. Their entire approach to existence was based on the assumption that the universe was dangerous and that the appropriate response was to become more dangerous in return, not through aggression, but through competence. Commander Reeves, Vexthara said as the evening wound down and the human delegation prepared to return to their own vessel. I believe this cultural exchange has been more illuminating than either of our peoples anticipated. I hope so, Reeves replied with genuine warmth. We're looking forward to learning more about your civilization and sharing what we can about ours. What they could share. Vexthara suspected that what humanity had to share was a fundamental approach to existence that would challenge everything the Zephyrian Empire had built over 3 millennia of careful safety optimization. The idea that intelligence and sophistication might be enhanced rather than threatened by controlled exposure to manageable risk was so revolutionary that it would require complete revision of their educational, social, and technological development programs. As the Infinite Caution resumed its course through space, its corridors still featuring padded corners and non-slip surfaces, Vexthara began composing her report to the Imperial Survey Division. The document would need to address not only first contact protocols and cultural exchange procedures, but the more fundamental question of how to interact with a species that had spent its evolutionary development becoming so competent at survival that they made danger look like art. Personal log, Captain Vexthara. Stardate 7.331.2. She began, her voice steady despite the conceptual upheaval of the past few hours. Initial cultural exchange with the human species has revealed capabilities that require significant revision of our threat assessment and diplomatic protocols. Recommend immediate consultation with the Imperial Strategic Planning Division regarding long-term implications of contact with species possessing advanced risk integration capabilities. She paused, considering how to summarize the evening's revelations in language that would convey their significance without triggering immediate panic among officials who had spent their careers assuming that their safe-to-first approach represented the pinnacle of civilized behavior. Additional note: human food preparation techniques demonstrate sophisticated mastery of controlled hazardous processes for beneficial outcomes. Recommend cultural exchange program expansion to explore potential applications of human risk management philosophy to imperial safety protocols. However, suggest that such exchanges be conducted aboard vessels equipped with enhanced medical facilities and emergency response capabilities. The final irony was not lost on her. The Zephyrian Empire, with its advanced technology and sophisticated safety systems, had achieved security through the elimination of risk. Humanity had achieved something potentially far more valuable: the transformation of risk into opportunity through the development of capabilities that made them more dangerous than the dangers they faced. In the end, the question was not whether humans were primitive or advanced, but whether a species that had learned to catch falling knives as a natural reflex might have something to teach a civilization that had spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of never having to catch anything at all. The universe, as it turned out, was vast enough to accommodate both philosophies. But Vexthara suspected that future historians would mark this first cultural exchange as the moment when one of them discovered it had room for improvement.